For magicians, he is an icon, yet to the public, he is virtually unknown.
The professor was a magician to his core.
The guy lived on tacos and brandy, and he smoked cigars. He did everything wrong. He stayed up till 2 o'clock, and he lived to be 98.
He taught tricks to royalty and was on a first-name basis with moguls, millionaires, gamblers, and thieves. He changed the way magicians thought, created, and how they performed.
All of his movements and his personality traits were designed to be incorporated into the performance of magic.
The press called him the Canadian Merlin. His acolytes called him the Professor. His name was DaiVernon.
People don't like to be fooled. They don't want to be fooled. I don't care if you do the greatest trick, they don't like it. But if you fool them and make them enjoy it. Little innocent pea in 3 walnut shells. Now, they used to put the pea under one of the shells. They'd put it under very fairly and squarely under the shell. Now, they'd move the shells around like this, and you had to bet which shell the pea was under. Looked like a very innocent game. Well, naturally, they'd think it was under the center one. It wasn't here. It wasn't here. As a matter of fact, it wasn't even here because it's in the hand.
DaiVernon was a magician revered by all other magicians. He was born in Ottawa, Canada, on the 11th day of June, 1894, into a respectable family. He was even given a respectable name, David Frederick Wingfield Verner. But some years later, he acquired his nickname when a local newspaper misprinted David as Dai. According to legend, Dai's interest in magic was spurred by gamblers who tossed decks of cards from the windows of passing trains. He would pick them up off the tracks and use them as practice decks. Vernon was certainly interested in the gamblers' secret moves, but more impressed that they never made mistakes.
Vernon felt that the real magicians were the gamblers because they knew the techniques that magicians didn't know.
If a magician screws up, they laugh at him. If a card cheat screws up, they kill him.
With magic, Vernon would never make mistakes. Vernon's family pushed him into studying engineering at Kingston's Royal Military College. He considered his degree useful, applying his understanding of mechanics to magic. But as far as his family was concerned, Dai threw it all away. After serving in World War I, he set out to become a professional magician. Naturally, he went to New York City. Vernon wowed audiences at the Kit Kat Club and the Rainbow Room with an act that reinvented close-up magic as simple and elegant.
He made things not look phony. Everything looked as though it had a non-magical purpose to it and some natural open reason for doing everything.
Vernon learned his card tricks from a little-known book called The Expert at the Card Table, now known in magic circles by the name of its author, Erdnase. A guide for professional card cheats and gamblers, it was also the perfect introduction to imperceptible hand movements and sleights, which were perfect for close-up magic. It became his Bible, and Vernon subsequently introduced the book to the magic community, which now embraces it as a classic.
That was one of the reasons he became a big hero in New York, because he knew everything in that book and nobody else knew it. Nobody else ever read that book. And they'd say, well, where did you get that? He said, well, that's in Erdnase.
He claimed very modestly not to be an originator, just to have read between the lines in Erdnase.
Vernon believed in reducing a trick to its bare essence, simplifying the complex, and making movements appear invisible and totally natural.
He really had a way of taking any idea and making it usually not only physically easier to do, but more deceptive at the same time, which is really terrific. You know, it's quite easy to make a move less effective by making it physically easier, but he was able to make it more deceptive and easier very often.
Vernon was fond of saying confusion is not magic, and it's a very important thing for a magician to understand. The spectator shouldn't walk out saying to himself, boy, I'm confused. The spectator should walk out saying, I know what happened, and it was impossible.
Vernon amazed audiences with these simple, uncomplicated gestures. His approach was dubbed the Vernon touch. And magicians emulating his style soon flocked to a renovated mansion devoted to the study and performance of magic, the Magic Castle in Los Angeles. It was here where Vernon, as the house magician, became a mentor and a teacher.
We started having lecturers come out to lecture for the members, and I came out to lecture for the club. And if any of you remember the play, The Man Who Came to Dinner, Di came, he saw the castle, saw a chair that he liked and sat in it, and immediately moved out to California and really never went back to New York.
Vernon is why all of the magicians came out to the West Coast. As I said, when he was in New York, the mecca of magic was New York. Every great magician, Cardini was there. You could just find them all, and they were all around Vernon. Vernon went to the West Coast in the 60s. All the magicians followed him.
Dozens would study under Vernon, including John Thompson, Bruce Servan, Michael Amar, and fellow Canadian Doug Henning. Vernon taught them to focus and simplify their acts. As a teacher, he had a sharp eye, a sharper tongue, and absolutely no tolerance for mediocrity.
He's like in this conversation, he's yelling at somebody, and I'm thinking, what is going on? And as I come closer and I round the corner, I realize that what's taking place is the fellow who performed that afternoon has asked the professor for his advice and his feedback, and what do you think? And the professor is just, he's yelling. He said, it was awful. It was the worst thing I've ever. Do yourself a favor. Get out of magic. Get out. But they were laughing. Didn't you hear them? No, they were laughing at you. They were laughing at you, not with you. And he goes, you are the worst. The worst. No, wait. No, there was one other guy. But you're the second worst performer I've ever seen.
He had a great eye. He could watch your act, and he could tell you things that he saw that were amazing. He did that the first time I was at the Magic Castle. It was terrific. And I took his advice always.
One time we're sitting upstairs and we were talking about some move, esoteric move, and all of a sudden a fella comes in who was not a good magician, and he says to Vernon, he said, here, Vernon, let me have your cards. I want to show you a card trick. Well, Vernon was being kind, and so the guy says, take a card, and he does it very badly, and he puts it back, and he talks and talks, and he finally counts down to like blah, 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 and Vernon says, there's the card, and the guy says, and there's your card, the Queen of Hearts. And so Vernon now looks at the guy and said, I'm going to tell you something. I could go down on Hollywood Boulevard, and I can take a 5-year-old boy and teach him to do that trick better than you do it in 3 minutes. He said, you don't have any idea what magic is about. You don't know how to hold the cards. You don't understand the trick. You don't understand the concept. You don't understand magic. You don't understand how to present it. You don't know anything. You know nothing about magic. You're an idiot. You just have no idea what you're doing. You're an idiot with a deck of cards. You should never have the cards in your hand. You should stick to those stupid sponge balls. And I can't believe that you did. This is the worst thing I ever. Now at this point, the guy just turns around and he walks over to the stairs and he walks upstairs to go to the dining room to eat dinner. And Vernon is screaming, and it was awful. I can't believe how horrible it was. It was the worst thing I ever saw. Now, when the guy gets out of sight, he's screaming at the top of his lungs. He gets out of sight, and I'm just kind of sitting there like this, you know. And Vernon leans over to me and says, do you know what's wrong with that guy? He doesn't know how to take criticism.
Vernon did more than teach. He became one of the first magicians to lecture and was, by all accounts, fascinating to hear.
Vernon was a wonderful lecturer, too. In fact, Vernon was one who normally spoke fast. In a lecture, he spoke fast.
Now you presume to shuffle by doing this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Of course, you don't count out loud. You just count to yourself, 11. Now you take one less the number of players, which would be 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you take the number of players, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A single card, and then twice the number of players, 10. Now this sounds complicated, but it's not.
And at the end, because time was running out, and I don't mean he wasn't under a time restriction, but he was going hoarse, and he may have talked for 3 or 4 hours straight. At the end, he would just be double fast. He would talk double fast and going as fast as he could to get more material in so the people would get to see more.
Remember those numbers. Twice the number of players plus 1, 1 less the number of players, the number of players, 1 card, and twice the number of players. If you do that, you can do it just the same way as I did it right now.
As a performer, mentor, and raconteur, Vernon was approached by scores of magicians. But on one occasion, he solidified his reputation as a master of deception, when in 1919, he was challenged by the legendary Harry Houdini and became the only magician to ever fool Houdini.
Houdini didn't do any magic. He did escapes.
Houdini also challenged magicians to fool him. Only one succeeded, DaiVernon in 1919.
Well, Harry was the kind of a guy who didn't want to be fooled by these tricks at all. What he wanted to do was he wanted to see them maybe, but he didn't want to show that he was fooled. What happened with this Vernon trick, Vernon said, all right, now, he said, take the cards. So Houdini take them and he shuffled them up and mixed them around, and Vernon says, all right, fine. He said, I'm going to take that card like this. He said, I'm going to take that card, and I'll put that card right down here in the middle of the deck like that. He said, all right, now watch this. He said, look, did you see any movement at all there? The guy says, well, no, I didn't see anything. He said, well, look, see, now the card came back to the top again. He said, now here, I'll show you again. Now look, I'll show you again. So he put the card down in there like this, and he puts it down in there. He squares them up nice and neat, and he said, now look, see, look, the card came back to the top. Well, it's got Harry's name on it, so he knows that there can't be 2 cards there. He says, let me see that card. So he looks at the card, you know, and he sees that the card is just a single card. So then Vernon repeats the trick. He does it again, and he said, well, do it again, and he does it again, and he does it again, and he does it again, and Harry cannot figure out how the trick works.
Though he was known as the man who fooled Houdini, there was another great mind in modern card magic, Ed Marlowe. A prolific writer of complex card manipulation, Marlowe's approach was the opposite of Vernon's. Their vastly differing techniques caused a philosophical rift between the two men, dating back to the 1950s and an annual magic convention in Colon, Michigan, known as the Abbott's Get-Together. For over 60 years, magicians have flocked to this small Michigan town for an informal week of performance and ideas swapping. And it was here that DaiVernon first met Ed Marlowe.
Back in Colon, Michigan, when they first had the get-together, they held the get-together in tents, and that's where he first got together with Vernon. And they treated him less than wonderfully. He never forgot that, but they weren't particularly polite to him. He was the kid from Chicago. And by their standards, he was a kid. He was 20 years or so younger, from a different generation. And that's where part of the competition developed.
Their differing theoretical approaches, Vernon's minimalist simplicity versus Marlowe's technical wizardry, led to different performance styles and camps. To this day, magicians will call certain moves a Vernon and others a Marlowe. It was a difference in approach that crossed into other areas as well. Marlowe the technician apparently felt the need to record practically every move he perfected.
Marlowe tried to publish every variation. Once he thought of a method of doing something, he would publish, it seems like hundreds of methods for having someone cut the deck into 4 heaps and having the top of them be aces.
Ed probably liked to delve with every possible method, you know, even maybe the bad methods, thinking maybe he can make something good out of it. And many times it was a fruitless effort, and I don't think Vernon probably did that. He just said, nah, that's no good, and went on to something better.
I don't think that it's fair to say Vernon versus Marlowe is performer versus technician. Vernon's influence was also on technique as well as on plots and so on. But I think that the biggest influence that Vernon had, which Marlowe did not have on card magic, was on style.
He was a perfectionist, and he used to tell magicians, he said, you learn one trick, just one trick, and you do it better than anyone in the world, and people will remember you. And he was very right.
Like Marlowe, he produced writings of the highest caliber, but one book came to be viewed as his masterpiece, the DaiVernon Book of Magic.
It was reading Vernon long before I ever met him where he really molded my work. There's a chapter in the Vernon Book of Magic called the Vernon Touch. It just talks about practice and the love of practice. And that if you don't love practice, maybe you should try something else. And it talked about naturalness. And it really talked about a way to be, not just a way to be a magician, but a way to be. And I read that chapter over and over and over again. When I tell you, hundreds of times, not dozens, hundreds.
You know, he once said to me, Johnny, I'd pay $1,000 to get another book like Erdnase. And I said, so would I, Professor, but I have another book like Erdnase, and it didn't cost me $1,000. And he said, what's that? I said, the DaiVernon Book of Magic. And he got this cut. He would get shy when you complimented him, but he had a nice smile on his face when I told him that.
Vernon died in 1992 at the incredible age of 98, a life in magic spanning 6 decades. His final years were spent in the company of a cadre of young magicians who became both his protégés and friends. Respectfully referred to as the Professor, one of his favorite pastimes was kicking back with a glass of scotch, a fine cigar, and an audience to hear his stories of legendary magicians. Everyone from Cardini to Keller, Houdini to both Blackstones, to Channing Pollock to Doug Henning. He was able to entertain friends with first-hand accounts of every one of them.
He was a real piece of living history because he would tell you these stories about Houdini, that he was actually there when it happened, and Downs and these other legends. But at the time, no one knew that he was going to end up to be such a raconteur at the age of 95.
DaiVernon was, in my estimation, the dean of magicians, the greatest single magician living in my lifetime. He's responsible for magic being where it is today, the high quality of magic we have today, and especially in sleight of hand.
This man fooled Houdini. This man was a bridge to legends of magic that few people ever got to become intimate with or contemporaries with.
In addition to his magical legacy, Vernon also left behind opinions on, apparently, everything, from the best way to palm a card to the best way to walk through a darkened room.
If all the lights go out in your house, he said, there's a power outage. He said, how do you walk around in the dark to make sure you don't hurt yourself? Well, you go like this. Well, Vernon says, no. He said, what happens if the door is right here and you don't hit the door and you walk smack into the door?
It was always just full of little insights. No, the best way to walk through a dark room is to touch your thumbs so that nothing goes between your hands.
He said, the way you do it is you put your thumbs together. That way nothing can come between your hands.
I mean, little tidbits like that were always coming out in conversations. Or, do you know how to find which way is up if you're buried in an avalanche? no, I don't.
Vernon was like a guy that you got in his car, and his radio got stations that your car didn't get.
Well, you clear out a space and then you spit and you see which direction gravity pulls it, and you dig in the opposite direction. Well, I'll make a mental note of that.
His mind was always great, and he used these cards and he used working out a new trick or inventing a new move as a kind of a mental exercise, and it kept him very right on the edge of things.
One day I sat with Vernon, and we were sitting at the bar opposite the Palace of Mystery at the Magic Castle. And he said, "Johnny, how's your health?" And I said, "My health is fine, Professor. It's kind of like you know. You never get sick. I never get sick. I've got a good immune system." He says, "Well, sometimes that's a blessing, and sometimes it's not." And with that, he brought out 3 yellow legal-sized pages with 3 columns on each side of the most famous magicians, Chung Ling Soo, Houdini, you name it. Everybody in the last 100 years was on these 3 sheets of paper. And he said, "Those are all my friends. They're all dead." Well, I didn't know what to say. It was a long moment. I said, "Day, I really don't know what to say." He said, "No, it's all right, Johnny. I keep making new friends."
They used just the 4 aces like this, and he always used to mention that the aces, see, but this trick has what you call effect. It's very simple. The ace of spades, I want you to notice, has more ink on it than, say, for example, the ace of hearts. And I mean, it does really, and therefore it weighs a little bit more, not much, but enough so that you can see the difference. You can feel the difference if you have a scale, a very minute scale. So anyway, we're going to save that ace of spades for last. So what you do is you simply spin the cards like this, see? Like that. Now what that does, even though you can see the cards almost directly on edge, one of the cards turns over. I don't know if you saw the move when I did it or not, but if you did, you have a very keen eye. You see there, the ace of diamonds is now turned face up. Now watch this like a hawk. You know what I'm going to do. We just spin it like that, and I'm certain that you didn't see what happened because, see, the ace of hearts then turns face up. Now, there's only one left. That's the ace of spades. Now, let's do this very, very quickly. Look, we just spin it like that. The ace of spades, the heaviest one, turns... Wait a minute. The ace of spades turns face... Well, wait a second. There's one thing that you can do with that. So you just snap it that way, and then you can cause the last one to turn face up.